The rich, brown leather of the chair in Mr. Bowen's opulent office felt cold and unyielding against my back, a stark contrast to the warmth I had always tried to cultivate in my own home. I clutched my simple, worn purse on my lap, my thin, age-spotted hands gripping it tightly, my knuckles turning a pale white from the pressure. Across the wide, polished mahogany table, my son David lounged comfortably as if he owned the place, a familiar, infuriating smirk already playing on his lips. His wife, Chloe, sat stiffly beside him, her designer dress looking out of place, her sharp eyes constantly scanning the room, undoubtedly calculating the value of every book and piece of art. I saw the quick, knowing look they exchanged, a silent celebration of a victory they thought was already won. They believed this was the finish line, the end of a long wait. For me, it was merely the starting gate of a race they didn't know they were in. I took a slow, quiet breath, trying to steady the nervous tremor I felt deep within my bones. I was Eleanor Hart, 68 years old, a recent widow, and I felt as fragile as antique glass. But hidden beneath this frail exterior was a core of hardened steel they had never anticipated. Mr. Bowen, my old friend and estate attorney, adjusted his glasses and prepared to speak. The air in the room grew thick and heavy, charged with unspoken greed and my own quiet resolve. "Can we please get this over with?" David said, his voice dripping with bored impatience. He didn't even glance in my direction, his focus on the expensive watch on his wrist. "I have a very important golf game scheduled for 2 o'clock, and the traffic at this hour is going to be a nightmare." Chloe, my daughter-in-law, leaned in close to him, her body angled away from me. She intended it to be a private whisper, but her voice was deliberately loud and clear, a calculated dart meant to pierce my heart. "Let's just get this over with so we can finally put her house on the market and be done with all of this." The words, "her house," hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. My house. The home where I had lovingly raised David, where his father, my dear Robert, and I had built a lifetime of memories, laughter, and love. Now, to them, it was just a burdensome asset, a piece of property to be quickly flipped for a profit to fund their lavish lifestyle. I kept my face a calm, unreadable mask, showing none of the devastation that rippled through me, but inside, my heart cracked a little more, another piece chipping away. I remembered the little boy with scraped knees who used to run laughing through those very halls, and I grieved for him deeply. That sweet, innocent boy was long gone, replaced by this impatient, avaricious stranger sitting across from me. Mr. Bowen cleared his throat firmly, his voice cutting through the tension to officially call the somber room to order. "We are gathered here today to read the last will and testament of the late Robert Hart, and the subsequent amendments and codicils made by Eleanor Hart, who is present with us today." David finally deigned to look at me, his smirk widening into a full, condescending smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Don't look so nervous, Mom," he said, his tone patronizing. "It's all very straightforward. You know I've earned everything that's coming to me. I am, after all, your only son, your sole heir." He said it like a threat, a statement of undeniable fact that brooked no argument. Mr. Bowen began reading the dense, formal legal language, the words flowing in a familiar, monotonous rhythm. I let the sound wash over me, tuning out the specifics, as my mind drifted back to the pivotal moment that had led us all here. This entire performance, this final, dramatic act, was a full month in the careful, deliberate making. It had all started when I'd accidentally overheard a private conversation I was never meant to hear, a conversation that shattered the very last beautiful illusion I had foolishly clung to about my own family. It had been a quiet, lazy Sunday afternoon just over a month ago. I was resting on my bed, lulled by the gentle hum of the house, when their voices drifted up from the kitchen below, clear and unconcerned, believing I was fast asleep. "The moment she's gone, we listed immediately." David's voice was firm, decisive. "No sentimental nonsense. The market is incredibly hot right now. We can flip the property fast and finally get out from under this crushing debt." Chloe's reply was swift, pragmatic. "Just make sure you keep playing the role of the good, devoted son until then. We're so close, David. We can't afford any mistakes now." I had frozen solid, my hand resting on the cold brass doorknob, my entire body going numb. It wasn't a sharp, stabbing grief I felt in that moment, but something colder, clearer, and far more terrifying, a profound and chilling understanding. Their visits, their sudden concern, the gifts, it was all a meticulously crafted performance. They weren't spending time with me out of love or familial duty. They were simply waiting. They saw my continued life as a frustrating inconvenience and my eventual death as their long-awaited financial payday. That was the precise, life-altering moment I decided to stop being a victim and start fighting back with every ounce of strength I had left. My dedicated home nurse, the kind and observant Sarah, was the very first person to notice the subtle but significant change in my demeanor and spirit. "Eleanor, you've seemed so troubled these past few weeks," she mentioned gently one afternoon while expertly checking my blood pressure. Her touch was always so professional and reassuring. "Is everything all right at home? You can talk to me, you know. I'm here to help." I almost broke down and told her everything, the words bubbling up like a bitter poison in my throat. But I held them back, afraid and uncertain. Instead, I posed a careful, hypothetical question, testing the waters. "Sarah, if someone, an older person, felt genuinely unsafe in their own home, perhaps because of the people around them, what would your professional advice be?" She looked at me then with such kind, yet deeply serious eyes, and she placed a comforting hand over mine. "I would advise them to protect themselves by any means necessary. That includes updating legal documents like a will if they feel their wishes might be disregarded. You'd be shocked, Eleanor, at what people, even family, are capable of when large sums of money are involved. They do strange, desperate, and sometimes terrible things." Her solemn warning was the final confirmation I needed. I wasn't just being a paranoid old woman. The danger I felt was real, palpable, and it was living under my own roof, wearing the familiar, trusted face of my only son. In the weeks following that chilling realization, David's behavior toward me underwent a dramatic and transparent shift. He began showing up at my house unannounced, always carrying bags of groceries, making an elaborate, theatrical show of putting them away in my cupboards. He would loudly announce how he was taking care of his mom and then, without fail, he'd pull out his expensive smartphone. I'd watch him angle the camera, taking multiple pictures of himself helping mom or fixing things around the house. I saw the posts later on his social media pages. "Another beautiful day being a dutiful son. #family first #blessed, he'd caption them, and his circle of friends would shower him with comments praising what a wonderful, selfless man he was. The sheer hypocrisy of it all made my stomach turn violently. It was all a hollow performance for an online audience, a cynical campaign to build a public case that he was the perfect, caring heir, laying the groundwork for what was to come. He was so focused on his own performance that he never once noticed the small, sophisticated hidden camera I had discreetly installed inside the large decorative vase in the living room, silently recording his true character for posterity. The final, unforgivable straw, the incident that solidified my resolve beyond any doubt, was the matter of my personal checkbook. While balancing my modest accounts, I noticed a substantial, unauthorized withdrawal for $5,000 that I absolutely did not recognize or authorize. My heart began to hammer a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs as a cold dread washed over me. I knew, with a sickening certainty, who was responsible. I confronted David later that evening, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to keep it steady. He didn't even have the decency to flinch or look ashamed. "That was probably just a simple bank error, Mom," he said, his voice smooth as silk, a practiced lie. "You know how unreliable that new online banking system can be. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. I'll look into it for you first thing tomorrow." He never did, of course. That stolen $5,000 was the tangible, irrefutable proof I needed that his corruption was active, not passive. It wasn't just about patiently waiting for me to die anymore. He was actively helping himself to my money, to my security, while I was still very much alive. That very night, sitting alone in the quiet of my study, I made the fateful, decisive call to Mr. Bowen, my oldest and most trusted friend, who also happened to be my estate attorney. I was finally ready to execute my plan. "Eleanor, it's so good to see you," Mr. Bowen said, his voice warm with genuine affection as he gestured for me to sit in the comfortable chair opposite his massive, orderly desk. Though I do wish our visits were under happier circumstances. I appreciated his kindness, but there was no time for pleasantries. I got straight to the devastating point. Robert, my son isn't just waiting for me to die. He's actively stealing from me, and I have reason to believe he wishes to accelerate the process. I need your help to make sure that before this is all over, he learns what true integrity really means. I want to teach him a lesson he can never forget. Robert's friendly face grew grim and serious, the lines around his eyes deepening with concern. He listened intently, without a single interruption, as I laid out my entire plan, presenting the evidence I had already gathered, the bank statement, the timestamps of his staged visits. He didn't try to dissuade me or talk me out of it out of some misplaced sense of familial peace. He simply nodded, his professional demeanor taking over. We can create a powerful legal instrument called a codicil, a secret addendum to the main will. He won't know it exists until the precise moment we choose. He will never see it coming. We worked together in his office for hours, carefully, deliberately crafting my final, devastating lesson for David. The secret document we created was my legal and personal masterpiece. It wasn't just a simple matter of disinheriting him, it was a carefully designed trap meant to expose his profound greed and malice for everyone to see. We added specific, binding clauses and conditions that were tied directly to his own predictable actions. Robert prepared a sealed envelope with strict, handwritten instructions on the front that it was only to be opened under specific, witnessed circumstances during the reading. This envelope will be the trigger, he explained to me, his voice low and steady. It contains the key that will unlock the truth. For extra insurance, I also personally mailed him a second, private envelope from a post office across town, with instructions to only open it if my very worst fears were confirmed by David's behavior at the reading. I was putting all the intricate pieces into place, like a chess master setting the board for a final, checkmating move, using my own last will and testament as the ultimate bait. I went home that day feeling utterly exhausted but completely resolved, a strange sense of peace settling over me. The stage was now perfectly set for the final act. Now, back in the formal, tense atmosphere of the law office, the moment of truth had finally arrived. Mr. Bowen looked up from the thick document in his hands, his gaze sweeping over the three of us. Before we proceed to the formal distribution of the assets, he announced, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room, there is a personal preamble that the deceased, Mrs. Hart, specifically wished to be read aloud at this time. David let out an audible, dramatic sigh and rolled his eyes toward the ceiling, but he leaned forward slightly in his chair, his base greed ultimately outweighing his impatience. Chloe, seated beside him, clutched his arm tightly, her knuckles white, her eyes gleaming with naked anticipation. Mr. Bowen adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat once more for emphasis, and began to read the words I had written with a steady hand and a broken heart. To my beloved son, David, he paused dramatically, letting the weight of those 5 simple words hang heavily in the still, silent air of the room. David's familiar, smug grin instantly returned, wide and expectant, believing he was about to hear his own praises sung. I simply folded my pale, trembling hands neatly on the polished surface of the table, looked directly at my son, and waited patiently for the world I had so carefully built for him to crumble into dust at his feet. Mr. Bowen's voice was steady and clear, cutting through the tense silence. To my son David, who believes inheritance is earned through entitlement rather than love, respect, or character, I feel compelled to speak the truth you have long ignored. David's smug grin vanished, replaced by a look of stunned confusion. He shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. Chloe's grip on his arm tightened, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. I watched their faces, my expression neutral, but my heart was a drumbeat of vindication. The lawyer continued, "You have mistaken my kindness for weakness, and my silence for ignorance. This document is not merely a transfer of wealth, it is a final accounting, a mirror held up to your actions over these past months." David opened his mouth to protest, but Mr. Bowen held up a stern hand, silencing him before a single word could escape. The reading was not a coronation, it was becoming an indictment. A sharp, startled gasp escaped Chloe's lips, her face paling beneath her expertly applied makeup. "What kind of will is this?" she hissed, her voice a low, furious whisper directed at no one in particular. This is insulting. This isn't legal." David's face flushed a deep, angry red. "This is outrageous. Bowen, what is the meaning of this? My mother would never write such poison." Mr. Bowen remained impeccably professional, his gaze cool and unwavering. "I can assure you, Mr. Hart, this document is entirely legal and was drafted by your mother in sound mind and of her own free will. Every word you are hearing was written by her hand. These are her sentiments, expressed clearly and with deliberate intent." He looked down at the paper again, ready to continue, as my son and his wife stared in bewildered and growing fury. My mind drifted back to the accident that had been the true catalyst for all of this. It was 6 weeks ago, on a Tuesday morning. I was walking down the staircase to get the mail when the top section of the wooden banister suddenly gave way under my hand. I stumbled, my balance lost, and tumbled down the last 5 steps, landing in a heap on the hard-tiled floor of the foyer. The pain was sharp and immediate, blooming in my hip and shoulder. Later, when the shock had subsided, I inspected the broken railing. The wooden post was fine, but the heavy, ornate brackets that secured it to the wall were loose. Upon closer examination, I saw that the screws were not broken or rusted. They had been cleanly removed and then hastily, carelessly replaced, making the structure dangerously unstable. It was no accident. It was a deliberate act. The very next day, I went to a specialty electronics store in a different part of town. I purchased a tiny, high-definition spy camera, no larger than a coin, designed to look like a common button. With a steady hand and a heart full of sorrow, I installed it inside the large, porcelain vase that sat on a shelf in my living room, a vase that had a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire room, including the hallway leading to my private study. That small, silent device became my most loyal confidant. It recorded everything: David's staged visits, his fake smiles for the camera, and, most damningly, it captured him late one night, sneaking into my study when he thought I was asleep, rifling through my desk drawers, searching for financial documents and the very will he believed would make him a rich man. During my next checkup, my doctor, Dr. Evans, noticed the yellowing bruises on my arm and the slight limp I couldn't quite conceal. "Eleanor, these injuries are consistent with a fall," he said, his tone gentle but concerned. "Is everything all right at home? Are you feeling safe?" I gave him a small, faint smile that I did not feel. "I am taking steps to ensure my safety, doctor. Thank you for your concern." He looked at me for a long moment, then wrote something on his notepad. "I want you to be very careful. Sometimes, the people closest to us can pose the greatest risk, often without us realizing it until it's too late." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "I'm already protected, doctor. More than anyone knows." His warning was just another piece of confirmation in the grim puzzle my life had become. Back in the lawyer's office, Mr. Bowen continued reading from the will. "Therefore, my estate, including the property at 1847, Maple Drive, its contents, and all financial holdings, shall not be transferred or distributed until my specific conditions have been met to the satisfaction of the executor of this estate." David could no longer contain himself. He let out a short, derisive laugh, a brittle sound in the tense room. "Conditions? What conditions? This is absurd. What could you possibly demand from beyond the grave, mother?" He glared at me, his eyes full of a venom I now recognized clearly. Mr. Bowen ignored the outburst completely, his focus remaining on the document in his hands. He was about to reveal the first part of my plan, the clause that would shatter their financial expectations into a million pieces. Mr. Bowen's voice remained calm and measured as he delivered the next blow. Clause 4B states that 50% of the total liquid assets from my estate shall be immediately transferred to a newly established charitable trust, the Eleanor and Robert Hart Community Center for Seniors. This transfer is pending the review and confirmed behavior of my sole heir, David Hart, during the probate process. The color drained completely from David's face. 50%. To a charity, he sputtered, his voice rising to a shout. You can't be serious. That's my money. That's our money. He gestured wildly between himself and Chloe, who looked as if she were about to be sick. That money is for our future. His sense of entitlement was now on full, ugly display for everyone in the room to witness. I remembered the day I had mailed that second, secret envelope to Mr. Bowen. I had driven to a post office several miles from my home, wanting no chance of being seen. The envelope was plain and white, with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small, unmarked USB drive. On the paper, I had written a short, clear message. Robert, if you are reading this, it is because David has laughed, protested, or shown anger during the reading of the will. His reaction will prove my fears were justified. Please play the audio file on this drive at that moment. It contains the evidence you need. I had slid it into the mailbox slot with a final, decisive push, my fate, and my son's, sealed within that simple envelope. It was my ultimate insurance policy. A week before the will reading, my longtime housekeeper, Ms. Lopez, had come to me, her hands wringing nervously in her apron. Her face was etched with guilt and fear. Senora Eleanor, she began, her voice trembling, I must tell you something terrible. Your son, David, he came to me last week. He offered me a great deal of money, $5,000 in cash, if I would misplace your heart medication for a few days. She looked down, ashamed. He said it would just make you a little tired, that it was a harmless prank. I listened, a cold stillness settling over me. I simply nodded, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Thank you for telling me, Maria. I already knew he would try something like this. You have done the right thing. Her confession was another terrible piece of the puzzle, but it was one I had already anticipated. What David and Chloe failed to notice was the quiet, unassuming young woman sitting in the corner of Mr. Bowen's office, diligently taking notes on a laptop. They dismissed her as a legal intern, which was partially true. But her other role was far more significant. At my discreet request, and with evidence provided by Mr. Bowen, she was also an investigator from Arizona Adult Protective Services, personally invited by me to observe the proceedings and witness David's behavior firsthand. Her presence was the final, legal safeguard in my plan. Her official report would carry immense weight, providing an impartial, professional account of the entitlement and hostility my son displayed when he believed his inheritance was being threatened. He was performing perfectly, just as I had predicted. The air in the room was thick enough to choke on. David's angry protests still hung in the silence. Mr. Bowen, with deliberate slowness, reached into his desk drawer and retrieved the plain, white envelope I had mailed to him weeks earlier. He held it up for a moment, his eyes meeting mine in a silent question. I gave a single, slight nod. All eyes in the room were locked on that envelope. David stared, his face a mask of furious confusion. What is that? What else are you trying to pull? Chloe had gone pale, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Mr. Bowen carefully slit the envelope open with a silver letter opener, the sound unnaturally loud. He pulled out the single sheet of paper and the small, unmarked USB drive. He read my private note to himself, then looked directly at David. Your mother left one final instruction, he said, his voice grave. Mr. Bowen did not read my note aloud. Instead, he turned to his computer, plugged in the USB drive, and clicked a few keys. He then looked at David, his expression unreadable. The note instructs me to play this audio file if, and only if, you displayed anger or laughter during the reading. You have done both. A terrible, dawning understanding began to spread across David's face, a flicker of fear in his eyes for the very first time. This is a setup, he whispered, but it was too late. Mr. Bowen pressed play on his computer. The office's high-quality speakers crackled to life, and immediately, David's own voice filled the room, clear, cold, and utterly damning. It was a recording from the hidden camera in my vase. The trap I had set months ago was finally springing shut. The audio was crystal clear, a perfect recording from that fateful night. David's voice, devoid of any affection, filled the law office. "Once she's gone, we'll fix the railing and call it an accident. The insurance will pay out, and no one will question it. Old people fall all the time." A sharp, collective gasp came from Chloe and the APS investigator. My own breath caught in my throat, hearing the cold calculation in his voice again. On the recording, Chloe's voice replied, "Are you sure it will work? It seems risky." David's response was chilling in its casualness. "It's foolproof. A loose railing, a tragic fall. It's the perfect solution to our cash flow problem." Mr. Bowen let the recording play for another 30 seconds, allowing every horrific detail to sink in, leaving no room for doubt or denial about their intentions. As the damning audio recording continued to play, the door to Mr. Bowen's office opened quietly. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. They had been waiting in the adjacent conference room, pre-notified by Mr. Bowen the moment the sealed envelope was opened. They stood silently, their presence adding a terrifying layer of finality to the scene. David spun around, his eyes wide with sheer panic and disbelief. "What is this? What are they doing here?" One of the officers, a serious-looking man with a calm demeanor, stepped forward. "David Hart?" he asked, his voice firm. David could only nod, his mouth agape. The officer continued, "We need you to come with us, sir. We'd like to ask you some questions regarding a complaint of attempted elder abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud." The law had finally arrived. Before David could even process the officer's presence, Mr. Bowen gestured to the APS investigator. She stood up, her professional demeanor firmly in place. As a representative of Arizona Adult Protective Services, and based on the evidence presented here today, including the audio recording, the documented financial exploitation, and the testimony I have personally witnessed, I will be filing an immediate report recommending full charges be pursued. She then looked toward the door, and my housekeeper, Ms. Lopez, entered the room, her face pale but determined. She had been waiting there, just as we had arranged. "I am willing to provide a formal statement," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "David Hart offered me money to interfere with Mrs. Hart's heart medication. I refused." Her testimony was the final, crushing blow. David completely lost control. He shot to his feet, his chair screeching backwards. "She's framing me," he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. Spittle flew from his lips. "This is all a lie. That audio is fake. She's a confused, sick old woman, and you're all falling for it." His face was a grotesque mask of rage and desperation. The police officers moved closer, ready to intervene. "She set this whole thing up because she's crazy. She's always been jealous of my life with Chloe." His outburst, his venomous accusations against his own mother, only served to further cement his guilt in the eyes of everyone present. He was proving my case for me with every hysterical word he shouted. Throughout David's explosive tantrum, I had remained perfectly still and silent. Now, I slowly leaned forward, my movements calm and deliberate. I looked at Mr. Bowen and spoke for the first time since the reading began, my voice quiet but steady, cutting through David's raging noise. "Robert," I said, "I believe it is time. Please read the very last paragraph of the main document now. The final page." A dead silence fell over the room. Even David was stunned into quiet, his chest heaving. All attention shifted back to Mr. Bowen. He picked up the will, found the place, and nodded. He adjusted his glasses and began to read the words that would dictate the true future of my legacy, the paragraph that held my ultimate surprise. Mr. Bowen's voice was clear and resonant as he read the final, decisive clause. "Article 7, the final bequest," he began. "Upon the event of my death, all my remaining assets, including the title to my home at 1847, Maple Drive and all funds not previously designated to the Hart Community Center, shall be placed into a protected trust. The sole beneficiary of this trust is my grandson, Caleb Hart, to be administered by a court-appointed, independent trustee until Caleb reaches the age of 25. A choke sound came from Chloe. Mr. Bowen continued, his gaze locking onto David. This bequest is conditional. Should David Hart face and be convicted of any criminal charges related to my person or my estate, his rights to petition the trust or act as a guardian for his son are permanently and irrevocably revoked. The assets will bypass him entirely and remain solely for Caleb's future. For a moment, there was absolute, stunned silence. Then, Chloe let out a strangled cry. She collapsed back into her chair as if her bones had turned to water, her face buried in her hands. "My God! Caleb," she sobbed, her body shaking with violent tremors. "You've doomed us. You've ruined our family. How could you do this to your own grandson?" I looked at her, my heart aching but my resolve like iron. I spoke to her directly, my voice firm. "No, Chloe. You and David did that yourselves the moment you chose greed over family, the moment you plotted an accident for me. I am protecting Caleb from learning your values. I am ensuring he has a future, untainted by your corruption." My words were not meant to comfort her, but to make her understand the consequences of their actions. The two police officers moved in, their patience clearly at an end. One of them produced a pair of cold, metallic handcuffs. "David Hart, you are under arrest for the attempted endangerment of a vulnerable adult and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent," the officer's voice continued, reciting the Miranda rights, but David seemed to hear none of it. He was staring at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of sheer hatred and utter disbelief as the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists. As the officers began to lead him from the room, he strained against them, turning his head to look back at me. "You did this," he snarled, his voice cracking with emotion. I met his gaze, my own eyes dry and steady. I spoke my final words to him, just loud enough for him to hear. "No, David. You did this to yourself." And with that, they took my son away. The aftermath of David's arrest was a whirlwind of quiet activity. The local news picked up the story, and for a few days, my phone rang constantly with reporters seeking comment. I never answered. Mr. Bowen handled all the inquiries, releasing a short statement that confirmed the facts without sensationalism. My privacy became my sanctuary. The house, once a place of tension and fear, was now filled with a profound, echoing peace. It was strange, the silence. It wasn't lonely, it was clean. I had purged the poison from my home. The legal proceedings against David began to move forward, a slow and grinding process that I chose to observe from a distance, trusting the system I had forced into motion to see justice done. Within 3 months, the first portion of the funds was transferred, and the Eleanor and Robert Hart Community Center for Seniors became a reality. We found a lovely, spacious building not far from my own neighborhood. On opening day, I stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, surrounded by people from the community. I didn't give a grand speech. I simply smiled and cut the ribbon. Seeing the bright, welcoming space, filled with comfortable chairs, books, and the cheerful chatter of people enjoying themselves, filled me with a deep, warm satisfaction that I had not felt in years. This was my true legacy, not a monument to wealth, but a haven of companionship and safety for others who might have felt as isolated and vulnerable as I once had. My grandson, Caleb, began visiting me every Saturday afternoon. At first, he was quiet and withdrawn, the turmoil in his home life clearly affecting him. But as the weeks turned into months, he started to open up. We would bake cookies together, just as I had with his father a lifetime ago, or work on puzzles in the sunroom. He never spoke about the arrest directly, but one afternoon, as we were planting flowers in the garden, he looked at me with his serious young eyes and said, "Mom says Dad is learning his lesson." I paused, my hands covered in soil, and felt a complex mix of sorrow and hope. "I hope he does, Caleb. I truly do." His visits became the highlight of my week, a thread of pure, unspoiled connection to the future. Almost 6 months to the day after the will reading, I received a letter in the mail. The return address was Chloe's. My hand trembled slightly as I opened it. The letter was long, filled with messy, emotional handwriting. She wrote of her shame, her regret, and how she had been swept up in David's ambition and their shared desperation. "I should have stopped him," she wrote. I saw the path we were on, and I did nothing. I am so sorry, Eleanor, for everything. I read it twice, then folded it carefully. I felt no burning anger toward her anymore, only a distant pity. I did not reply, but I did not throw the letter away. Instead, I took it to the community center and added it to a new, anonymous display we had started, called the Wall of Reflection, where people could share stories of forgiveness and lessons learned. At the community center's first annual Thanksgiving dinner, the large hall was filled with laughter and the warm smell of roasted turkey. Dozens of seniors and their families gathered, a vibrant, joyful crowd. Mr. Bowen was there, and he asked for a moment to speak. He raised his glass, and the room quieted down. "I would like to propose a toast," he began, his voice warm with respect. "To Eleanor Hart, a woman of immense courage and foresight, who proved, beyond any doubt, that a sharp mind and a principled heart will always beat mere greed." A chorus of "Hear, hear," echoed through the room. Glasses clinked all around me. I smiled, feeling the genuine warmth of the community, a feeling of belonging I had craved for so long. That Christmas was a quiet, simple affair. A light snow fell outside, dusting my garden in white. I sat by the crackling fireplace, a soft wool blanket over my knees. The house was silent, but it was a comfortable, peaceful silence. I was reading a letter from Caleb, who was spending the holiday with his mother. His childish script was neat and earnest. "Thank you, Grandma," he wrote, "for protecting me. Mom says you kept me safe from turning out like him. I love you." I held the letter to my chest, tears welling in my eyes for the first time in this entire ordeal. They were not tears of sadness, but of profound relief and love. He understood. That was the greatest gift I could have ever received. One morning in January, the local newspaper arrived on my doorstep. A small, discreet article on the second page caught my eye. The headline read, "Elderly Widow's Prudence Thwarts Son's Inheritance Scheme." The article was respectful, outlining the basic facts of the case without using our names, referring only to a prominent local family. It described the legal safeguards I had put in place and the successful establishment of the community center. I read it slowly, then carefully folded the newspaper along its creases. I carried it into my study and tucked it between the pages of my old family Bible, not as a trophy, but as a solemn record, a closing of a painful chapter in the book of my life. A few weeks later, Mr. Bowen paid me a surprise visit at home. He sat in my living room with a cup of tea, a pleased expression on his face. "Eleanor, I have some excellent news regarding Caleb's trust fund," he said. "The conservative investments we made have performed exceptionally well. Due to the strong market, the principal has grown significantly. The fund's value now exceeds $1 million. I was stunned into silence for a moment, then a soft, genuine laugh escaped me. It was a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy. "Well, I said, shaking my head in wonder. "Then my grandson will never have to want for love or money. He will have the security to build a good life, on his own terms." It was more than I had ever dreamed possible. As I set the table for a small, solitary Christmas dinner the following year, my eyes fell upon the empty chair where David had always sat. For so long, that empty space had ached like a missing limb, a constant reminder of loss and failure. But this year, as I looked at it, I felt something different. The sharp pain was gone, replaced by a quiet, accepting sadness. I had not gotten my son back, but I had found peace. I had protected my grandson and honored my husband's memory by helping my community. "Peace," I said aloud to the quiet room. The word felt true and solid, a gift I had finally given to myself after a long and difficult battle. Sitting here now, in the gentle stillness of my sunroom, I sometimes think back to that day in the lawyer's office. David believed my story ended at the will reading. He thought the final page of that document was the end. He could not have been more wrong. That was merely the end of his version of my story, a tale of a weak-old woman to be managed and discarded. The real story, my story, was just beginning. The real legacy was not the money, the house, or even the community center, as wonderful as it is. The true, lasting legacy was the lesson I left behind, that dignity is priceless, that courage can be found at any age, and that no one, not even your own child, has the right to strip you of your personhood. That is a story that will live on long after I am gone. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.